Joint Base Oceana, Virginia Beach. 0600 hours on a Tuesday morning that would save 73 lives and end 3 careers. The numbers painted a picture no Marine wanted to see. Operation Sandstorm. Hostage extraction. Denied territory where the showing ran red and the intelligence reports read like casualty projections. 73 United States Marines preparing to walk into darkness. Enemy force estimates showing 12 to 1 odds. 89% projected casualty rate. Those weren't statistics. Those were obituaries waiting to be written in blood and folded flags. Commander Sterling Vaughn had already drafted the condolence letters. 26 years in the Marine Corps had taught him to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. But hope was a luxury item when the intel looked this grim. He'd watched good men die from bad information before. Ramadi in 2006, Sangin in 2010. Places where mistakes made in air-conditioned offices killed committed warriors in 100-degree kill zones. He wouldn't let it happen again. Not on his watch, not to his Marines. What Commander Vaughn didn't know was that the woman sitting in the back corner of his briefing room had spent 24 years making sure men like him never had to write those letters. That she'd tracked a conspiracy that turned American blood into foreign currency. That in the next 90 minutes she would detonate a truth bomb that would shatter everything he thought he knew about rank authority and the price of dismissing quiet competence. The Tactical Operations Center hummed with pre-mission tension. 7 officers clustered around the holographic tactical display, their faces painted blue by the glow of digital terrain. The room carried the particular atmosphere of men about to step into violence. Bad coffee, gun oil. The metallic tang of equipment recently cleaned. The weight of responsibility that came with sending Marines into harm's way. Outside the reinforced windows, dawn broke over the Atlantic in shades of copper and steel. F/A-18 Super Hornets lined the flight line like sleeping predators. The base was waking. Thousands of personnel beginning the daily ritual of maintaining military readiness. Unaware that in this single room a test was beginning that would determine who lived and who died in the next 48 hours. Vaughn stood at the head of the table, 6'2", broad shoulders that filled his uniform with the kind of presence that came from decades of being instantly obeyed. His chest displayed 3 rows of ribbons, each one a story written in fire and blood. Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, Navy Commendation Medal. The decorations of a warrior who'd earned his rank in places where rank was just something you wore until the shooting started and competence was all that mattered. His index finger traced a line across the holographic map. Precise, confident. The gesture of a commander who'd planned dozens of operations and brought his Marines home more often than not. Operation Sandstorm commences at 2200 hours local time. Intelligence confirms hostile forces holding 8 American contractors in this compound. His finger stabbed at a cluster of buildings rendered in 3-dimensional detail. We have a 3-minute window from initial breach to extract the packages before enemy reinforcements arrive from this position, 14 clicks north. The junior officers leaned forward, studying terrain that would either save their lives or kill them. Hills and wadis, choke points and kill zones. The geography of controlled violence. Lieutenant Kyra Sutton spoke up. 26 years old, 3 months out of officer candidate school, still new enough to ask questions that more experienced officers had learned to keep to themselves. Sir, what about alternative extraction routes if the primary is compromised? Vaughn's expression hardened. It was a look the younger officers had learned to recognize. The look that said to the question had already been considered calculated and dismissed as tactically unsound. There won't be alternatives, Lieutenant. We execute perfectly or not at all. This isn't a training exercise where we get do-overs. 73 Marines are counting on this plan working exactly as briefed. From the back corner of the room came a sound. Subtle, almost nothing, the quiet shift of fabric against chair. The micro-movement of someone who'd been sitting perfectly still for 43 minutes, suddenly adjusting position. Every head turned. She sat near the wall like she'd been placed there by someone who didn't know where else to put her. Standard issue Marine Corps Desert Marpat fatigues. Digital camouflage in tan and brown that should have made her blend into any military environment. But her uniform was wrong, stripped bare, no name tape identifying who she was. No rank insignia showing what authority she carried. No unit patches revealing where she belonged. No decorations indicating what she'd done or where she'd served. Nothing. Just empty fabric where identity should have been. Her name was Cordelia Blackwell, 45 years old, 24 years of military service that most people would never know about. 4 stars that she never wore because rank was just clothing, And what mattered was what you did when the uniform came off and all that remained was the person underneath. But Sterling Vaughn didn't know any of that. Not yet. He saw a woman, average height, maybe 5'7", dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, gray eyes that reflected the blue glow of the tactical display. A face that spoke of competence more than beauty, sharp features, crow's feet at the corners of her eyes from years squinting into desert sun and through precision rifle scopes. A small scar above her right eyebrow, another along her jawline that suggested she'd been somewhere her face had met something violent. She held a ruggedized tablet, military grade, the kind issued to personnel who worked with classified information in hostile environments. The screen cast pale light across features that remained professionally neutral as every officer in the room stared at her. Vaughn paused, the rhythm of his briefing broken by her movement. He didn't like interruptions, didn't like unknown variables in operations where everything needed to be controlled and predictable. Is there a problem? His voice carried edge. Command authority. The assumption that she would defer to his rank and his position and his control of this space. She looked up from her tablet. Her eyes met his for exactly 2 seconds. Not challenging, not submitting, just looking, making contact, acknowledging the question. Then she returned her attention to her screen. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the room without being raised. The kind of voice that didn't need volume because it had authority built into every syllable. The intelligence suggests a secondary patrol pattern in this quadrant. Her finger didn't move toward the holographic display. She just made the statement, flat, factual, like she was commenting on the weather instead of contradicting a combat commander's operational assessment. Your 3-minute window may be closer to 90 seconds. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Officers exchanged glances, quick, uncertain. Who was this woman to question Commander Vaughn's tactical assessment? In a briefing room where rank was everything and the chain of command was sacred, her lack of visible insignia made her input seem presumptuous at best. Insubordinate at worst, Vaughn's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. Processing, calculating, trying to reconcile what his training told him about respecting the chain of command with what this unknown woman had just said in front of his officers. He studied her, really looked at her for the first time since the briefing had begun. Her age suggested experience. Her bearing suggested military background. But her lack of rank insignia suggested she was nobody important. Administrative staff, maybe? A contractor doing technical work. Certainly not someone whose tactical assessment should carry weight in a Tier 1 combat operation. You're awfully quiet back there. The words came out with an edge of amusement. The kind of amusement that had teeth hidden behind the smile. What are you, supply liaison records management, civilian contractor, playing dress-up? A few of the junior officers smiled. Not cruel smiles exactly, just the reflexive response of men who recognized a pecking order and knew where they stood in it. The woman with no rank had just been publicly put in her place. Cordelia didn't react. Her expression remained neutral. She made a note on her tablet with efficient movements, then set the device aside and looked up at Vaughn again. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 5. 7. Major Nolan Merrick shifted in his chair. Intelligence officer, 44 years old, 16 years of service. He'd been watching the woman since she'd entered the briefing room 30 minutes before the session started. Something about her bothered him, something he couldn't quite identify, like recognizing a face from a half-forgotten photograph, but being unable to place where you'd seen it before. Master Sergeant Dalton Pierce stood against the back wall, arms crossed, 52 years old, 28 years in the Corps, Silver Star for Valor, the kind of senior NCO who'd earned the right to stand instead of sit during briefings. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes were active, watching, calculating, processing information that he would later transmit to people who paid very well with American operational intelligence. Vaughn took a step toward the woman. His boots clicked on the polished floor. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet. I'm asking you a direct question. His voice had shifted now, full command tone. The voice that expected immediate compliance and didn't accept excuses. What's your clearance level? What are you even doing in this briefing? Cordelia stood. The movement was fluid, controlled. She matched his gaze without challenging or deferring, just meeting him as an equal in a room where rank said they weren't. I'm here to assess operational readiness, Commander. Under whose authority? JSOC. The acronym hit the room like a flashbang grenade. Joint Special Operations Command. The organization so far above the normal chain of command that most officers would never interact with them directly. The people who planned operations that didn't officially exist and ran missions that would never appear in any public record. Vaughn's expression flickered. Surprise, suspicion, a flash of uncertainty before professional control reasserted itself. JSOC doesn't send unranked personnel to assess combat operations. He gestured at her bare uniform. You're not wearing insignia, you're not on my roster. And I don't appreciate civilians with borrowed credentials disrupting my briefing. I'm not a civilian commander. The way she said it made the temperature drop another 10 degrees. Vaughn stepped closer, his height advantage, using physical presence to establish dominance. Then what are you? Oh. This was the moment, the decision point. Cordelia could see it in his eyes. The stubborn pride of a career officer who'd climbed through the ranks by being right more often than wrong, who'd earned his position through sweat and blood and years of competent leadership, who wasn't about to let some unknown woman undermine his authority in front of his Marines. She reached into the cargo pocket of her fatigues, withdrew a laminated identification card, extended it toward him without expression. Vaughn took it. His eyes scanned the information. The clearance code was genuine. JSOC authentication. Access level higher than anything he'd seen before. But there was no name, no rank, just an alphanumeric identifier and a classification level that shouldn't exist. He handed it back with a barely concealed skepticism. This doesn't tell me who you are. It tells you everything you need to know, Commander. I need to know your rank. I need to know your name. I need to know why you're disrupting my operation with contradictory intelligence. His voice had risen slightly, frustration breaking through the professional facade. Report to my office at 1400 hours for credential verification. Until then, you will observe only. No comments, no input, no disruption of my briefing. Is that clear? Cordelia met his eyes, held his gaze for 3 full seconds, then nodded once. Crystal clear, Commander. She collected her tablet, moved toward the door. The junior officer parted for her like water around a stone. Not out of respect, out of uncertainty, not knowing who she was or what authority she carried, or whether acknowledging her would be seen as insubordination. As she passed Lieutenant Sutton, the younger woman caught something in Cordelia's expression, a micro-expression that lasted less than a second. It wasn't anger at being dismissed. It wasn't frustration at being questioned. It was something else entirely. Satisfaction, like everything that had just happened had gone exactly according to plan. The door closed behind Cordelia with a soft pneumatic hiss. She walked through corridors she'd memorized from satellite imagery and architectural plans before ever setting foot on this base. Her pace was unhurried. Her expression revealed nothing. But inside, behind the professional mask that 24 years of service had perfected, Cordelia Blackwell was counting down. Counting down to the moment when Sterling Vaughn's world would flip upside down. When the woman he'd dismissed as a contractor would reveal 4 stars that outranked everyone on this base. When the quiet voice he'd ignored would become the most powerful authority he'd ever encountered. She had 7 hours and 43 minutes until that moment arrived. 7 hours to gather the evidence that would save 73 lives. 7 hours to expose a conspiracy that had killed 12 Marines and threatened to kill 73 more. 7 hours before Commander Sterling Vaughn learned the most important lesson of his career. That rank was just clothing, and the most dangerous people in any room are the ones who didn't need insignia to carry authority. Back in the briefing room, Vaughn returned to the tactical display, trying to regain the momentum that had been shattered by the exchange, trying to reassert control over a briefing that had suddenly felt less certain. As I was saying, gentlemen, our infiltration route follows this ridgeline. Air assets will provide overwatch from this position, but terrain limitations mean if we take contact, we're operating with minimal backup until extraction. The officers nodded, made notes, asked tactical questions about equipment and timing and rules of engagement. The briefing continued with professional efficiency, but something had changed in the room. Several officers kept glancing toward the door where the woman had exited, wondering, calculating, processing the fact that JSOC had sent someone to assess their readiness and that someone had just contradicted their commander's intelligence in front of the entire operational staff. Lieutenant Sutton leaned toward Captain Wesley Durant, 36 years old, naval intelligence, the kind of quiet professional who saw patterns other people missed. "Sir," she whispered, "who was that?" Durant's expression was thoughtful. "I don't know, Lieutenant, but I intend to find out." Across the room, Major Merrick and Master Sergeant Pierce exchanged a look. Brief, meaningful. The kind of look that passed between men who shared a secret and had just seen something that threatened to expose it. The briefing concluded 20 minutes later. Officers filed out to prepare for pre-deployment equipment checks and final training. But small clusters formed in hallways. Quiet conversations. Speculation about the woman with no rank who challenged Commander Vaughn and walked away when he tried to put her in her place. JSO doesn't send contractors to operational briefings, one captain muttered to his colleague. Whoever she is, she's got clearance higher than anything I've seen. Did you see the scar on her jaw? Another officer observed. That's not from a car accident. That's combat trauma. Vaughn looked rattled. I've never seen him rattled. The gossip spread like wildfire through the social networks that existed in every military installation. By 0800 hours, half the base had heard that some mysterious woman had shown up at the Sandstorm briefing and challenged the commander's intelligence assessment. By 0900 hours, speculation ranged from CIA to Pentagon Inspector General to Special Investigator hunting for leaks. Nobody guessed four-star general, because four-star generals didn't operate without insignia, didn't sit quietly in the back of briefing rooms, didn't let commanders dismiss them like administrative staff, which was exactly why Cordelia Blackwell operated that way. She spent the morning being invisible, present but not noticed, observing without being observed. The base flowed around her like water around a stone, personnel passing without recognition. Because she wore no rank and carried no obvious authority, and military culture had trained people to focus on the symbols of power rather than the substance beneath them. At 1000 hours, she appeared on the rifle range where Marines were conducting weapons qualifications. 8 lanes, targets set at 300 to 800 meters. A dozen young Marines struggling with new thermal optics that should have been straightforward, but weren't. Lieutenant Sutton was there, frustrated, watching her Marines fumble with calibration procedures that the technical manual said should work, but didn't. Lieutenant, Cordelia's voice came from directly behind her. Sutton jumped slightly, turned. Ma'am, She paused, uncertain how to address someone with no visible rank. Cordelia is fine. She moved toward the nearest rifle. An Mk13 Mod 7, bolt-action precision weapon, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, topped with a Night Force AT, ACR thermal optic that cost more than most civilian cars. May I? Sutton hesitated, then nodded. These systems aren't syncing properly. The manual says automatic alignment, but we're getting parallax errors that throw off depth perception by 6 to 8 inches at distance. Cordelia picked up the rifle with the casual confidence of someone who'd fired thousands of rounds through identical weapons. She examined the optic mounting system with the kind of attention most people reserve for diffusing explosives. The problem is eye relief calibration. Her fingers made minute adjustments to the eyepiece assembly. These systems were designed for operators wearing MICH 2000 helmets. You're using the newer lightweight OpsCore models. That sits a quarter-inch higher, creates the parallax. She made the adjustment. 30 seconds of work. Handed it back to the corporal who'd been struggling with it. Try it now. He raised the rifle, acquired a target at 600 meters. His expression shifted from frustration to surprise. It's perfect. How did you know that? But Cordelia had already moved to the next weapon, making the same adjustment, and the next. 12 systems calibrated in the time it would have taken most armorers to diagnose a single problem. Sutton watched with growing fascination. This wasn't someone who'd read about the equipment in a manual. This was someone who'd used it, in the field, in conditions where mistakes meant consequences far worse than missed qualifying scores. When the last rifle was calibrated, Cordelia selected one. Loaded 3 rounds, assumed a prone position with the economy of motion that came from muscle memory built over decades. The first shot cracked across the range. 0.3 seconds later, the 800-meter target showed impact. Center mass, second shot, same target, same point of impact. Third shot, the grouping could have been covered with a quarter. She stood, cleared the weapon, handed it back. The mounting screws need to be torqued to 65 inch-pounds after transport. It's not in the manual because most armorers already know. But with new equipment and young Marines, it's easy to miss. The gunnery sergeant, who'd been insisting the problem was operator error, now looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. Yes, ma'am. How did you? But Cordelia was already walking away. Sutton caught up. That was incredible shooting. That was adequate shooting, Lieutenant. The rifle did most of the work. But there was approval in Cordelia's tone. Approval for Sutton's instinct to question the official explanation and seek solutions instead of accepting excuses. They walked in silence. Around them, the base hummed with late morning activity. Helicopters lifting off, jet engines being tested, the grinding work of military readiness. Ma'am, Sutton tried again. What should I call you? Cordelia Works. Just Cordelia, no rank. For now. The younger woman processed this. Military culture demanded clear hierarchy, clear understanding of who gave orders and who followed them. This ambiguity was uncomfortable. Commander Vaughn wants you to report to his office at 1400. I remember. He's going to demand answers about who you are, about your authority. Sutton paused. Are you going to tell him? Cordelia stopped walking, turned to face the lieutenant directly. Gray eyes meeting brown, evaluating, deciding whether this young officer was someone who could be trusted when simple answers stopped being sufficient. Lieutenant Sutton, if you had intelligence that contradicted your commanding officer's assessment, intelligence that could save Marine lives, but sharing that intelligence would make you look insubordinate and possibly end your career, what would you do? Sutton didn't hesitate. Share it anyway, ma'am. Good Marines are worth more than my career. That's the right answer. Cordelia nodded once, sharp, definitive. Remember that answer tonight, around 2300 hours. You're going to need it. Before Sutton could ask what that meant, Cordelia had entered the administrative building and disappeared into the corridor maze beyond. The lieutenant stood alone on the steps. Something was happening, something bigger than a routine readiness assessment. She could feel it building like pressure before a storm. That electric tension when the world was about to change and there was nothing you could do but hold on and trust you'd prepared correctly. At 13:55 hours, Cordelia walked towards Sterling Vaughn's office. The building was quieter now, most personnel at lunch or conducting afternoon training. Her footsteps echoed in empty corridors. Vaughn's office was third floor, corner position, windows overlooking the flight line where F/A-18S sat in neat rows like sleeping dragons. The door stood open. He sat behind a desk organized with military precision. Everything at right angles, everything in its designated place. A man who believed in order and structure and the chain of command. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. His expression was controlled, but tension showed in his jaw, in the way his shoulders held fractionally too tight. Close the door. Cordelia entered. Closed the door, remained standing though he gestured toward a chair. This wasn't a conversation between equals. Not yet. It was an interrogation, and she needed to let him maintain that illusion a little longer. I ran your credentials through every authentication system I have access to. Vaughn tapped a file on his desk. The clearance code is valid. JNSOC authority confirmed. But there's no name attached. No personnel file. No service record. Just a classification level I've never seen before, and an alphanumeric identifier that doesn't appear in any database. That's by design, Commander. By whose design? Frustration broke through his professional control. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're really doing here. And I don't appreciate Ghost disrupting my operations based on intelligence I can't verify. I understand your frustration. Do you? His voice rose slightly. In 18 hours, I'm sending 73 Marines into denied territory based on intelligence that my S2 section has verified through multiple sources. You show up with no identification, no rank, and tell me my 3-minute extraction window is actually 90 seconds. If I'm wrong, Marines die. If you're wrong, Marines die. I need to know which of us is right, and I can't make that determination when I don't even know your name. It was a fair point, a legitimate concern, the kind of question any competent commander would ask. Cordelia met his eyes, held his gaze. Let him see past the professional mask to the person underneath. The person who'd spent 24 years hunting ghosts and traitors and people who valued profit over patriotism. Commander Vaughn, what I'm about to tell you is classified above your current clearance level, but the situation requires you to know, and my authority allows me to read you in. She paused, let the weight of those words settle. I'm here because 3 operations similar to Sandstorm have failed in the past 8 months. Operation Silent Echo, Operation Winter Fang, Operation Iron Resolve, 12 United States Marines killed, valuable intelligence compromised. An analysis indicates all 3 operations were leaked from this base. Vaughn's expression shifted from frustration to shock. That's impossible. My security protocols are being circumvented by someone with authorized access. She pulled out her tablet, called up files that made his security terminal look like a child's toy. Someone who's been selling classified operational intelligence to a defense contractor called Black Ridge Strategic Solutions. That contractor is selling it to hostile forces, And those forces are using it to kill your Marines. She handed him the tablet. Read. Vaughn read. His face went pale. The financial records showed money transfers, offshore accounts, wire transfers from shell corporations, $470,000 to one account, $52,000 to another, nearly $2 million to a third. The access logs showed patterns. Classified information accessed at 03:47 hours every 72 hours. Like clockwork. Like someone had a schedule and a quota and buyers waiting for fresh American blood. This can't be real. But his voice lacked conviction. His tactical mind was already processing implications, already seeing patterns, already recognizing that the evidence fit together too perfectly to be fabricated. Master Sergeant Dalton Pierce, Cordelia said the name quietly, watching his reaction like a sniper watches a target. Major Nolan Merrick, and one more whose identity I'm still confirming. But the evidence suggests someone with base commander authority. Vaughn looked like he'd been shot. Dalton Pierce, number impossible. I've known that man for 18 years. He saved my life in Ramadi, twice, which is exactly why he's the perfect asset. Cordelia's voice remained clinical, professional. Someone you trust absolutely. Someone with access to everything because you've never had reason to question him. Someone who knows your blind spots and how to exploit them. And Major Merrick, your S2 officer, the man responsible for verifying the intelligence you're using for Operation Sandstorm. The man who has access to every classified file, every operational plan, every timeline and route and contingency. The implications crashed over Vaughn like artillery. If this was true, his entire command was compromised. His trust had been weaponized. His Marines were walking into a trap because he'd been too proud to see it. What do you need from me? The question came out hollow, defeated, the sound of a man whose world had just inverted. Cordelia stepped closer to his desk. I need you to ask me the question you asked this morning, the question I didn't answer. Ask me again, Commander. And this time I'll tell you the truth. Vaughn looked at her, really looked at her. Seeing her for the first time with eyes that weren't filtered through assumptions about rank and protocol and who belonged where. But what's your rank? Cordelia reached into her cargo pocket, withdrew her identification card, but this time she held it so he could read every detail, so he could see what he'd missed that morning when he'd been too focused on asserting his authority to notice what the card actually said. Vaughn took it. His eyes moved across the text. General Cordelia M. Blackwell, 4 stars. Joint Special Operations Command. Authentication code, Tango 7 Sierra 921 Foxtrot. Clearance level, Cosmic Top Secret. The card fell from his fingers. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. 4-star General. Cordelia's voice was quiet, matter of fact, like she was discussing the weather instead of revealing that she outranked everyone on this base by at least 3 grades. JSOC Commander for Counterintelligence Operations. And for the past 16 hours, the woman you dismissed as administrative staff. Vaughn couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely process what he was hearing. The woman he'd patronized in the briefing room was a 4-star general. The woman he'd told to sit down and be quiet was the highest-ranking officer he'd likely ever met face-to-face. The woman he'd ordered to report to his office for credential verification had the authority to end his career with a single phone call. General, Now our words failed completely. Don't apologize, Commander. Cordelia's expression softened fractionally. You reacted exactly as I expected, exactly as I needed you to. If you'd known who I was from the beginning, you would have treated me differently. Your officers would have behaved differently. Pierce and Merrick would have known someone was watching. The conspiracy would have gone underground, and Marines would have died. She let that sink in. Let him understand that his mistake had been tactical instead of personal, that she'd used his assumptions against the very people trying to kill his Marines. Now I need you to finish this. I need you to trust me completely, not because of my rank, but because the evidence is real and the threat is real, and 73 lives depend on what we do in the next 16 hours. Vaughn stood, years of military training reasserting control over shock. When faced with a superior officer, you stood at attention. You saluted. You followed orders. His salute was parade ground perfect. Cordelia returned it. 4 stars acknowledging a commander's authority. The gesture small but profound. What are your orders, General? And just like that, everything changed. The test was over. The lesson learned. And Sterling Vaughn had just passed the most important evaluation of his career. Not because he'd been right about the intelligence, but because when confronted with evidence that contradicted his assumptions, he'd chosen truth over pride, mission over ego, Marines over career. Outside the window, the sun climbed toward afternoon. Operation Sandstorm would launch in 8 hours. Pierce and Merrick didn't know they'd been identified, didn't know the walls were closing in, didn't know that the quiet woman they dismissed that morning was about to destroy their entire conspiracy. Cordelia Blackwell had 8 hours to save 73 lives. 8 hours to prove that rank was just clothing. 8 hours to teach one final lesson, that the most dangerous people in any room were the ones who didn't need stars on their collar to carry authority. The real operation was just beginning. The agreement between Cordelia Blackwell and Sterling Vaughn lasted exactly as long as it took for him to realize what she was asking. Trust without verification, cooperation without protocol, faith in a stranger who wouldn't even give her rank. But he'd seen the evidence. The financial records didn't lie. The access logs didn't lie. Somewhere in his command, someone he trusted was selling American blood for foreign money. Cordelia left his office with a simple instruction: act normal. Continue preparations for Operation Sandstorm as if nothing had changed. Let the routine of the base mask the investigation happening in its shadows. The afternoon sun beat down on Joint Base Oceana with the relentless heat of a Virginia summer. Temperature climbing into the 90s. Humidity thick enough to taste. The kind of weather that made Marines sweat through their uniforms and reminded them that comfort was a luxury they'd surrendered the day they took the oath. On the Eastern Training Grounds, a dozen Marines struggled with equipment that should have been straightforward, but wasn't. AN/PVS-31 night vision devices. Dual-tube panoramic systems that turned darkness into green-lit tactical advantage. Standard issue for special operations. Except these weren't operating to standard. Lieutenant Kira Sutton stood among them, watching her Marines fumble with calibration procedures that should have been second nature. The frustration was palpable. These were good Marines, competent Marines, but the new equipment was defeating them, and no amount of effort seemed to bridge the gap between the manual's instructions and actual results. She didn't see Cordelia approach. The older woman moved with a quietness that seemed unnatural for someone crossing an open training field. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound, just efficient purpose. Lieutenant, Cordelia's voice carried just far enough. May I? Sutton turned surprised. She'd been thinking about the woman from the briefing all afternoon, wondering who she really was, wondering why Commander Vaughn had looked so shaken after their meeting. Ma'am, I mean Cordelia. The informality still felt wrong. Marines didn't address people without rank by their first names, but she'd been told to, so she did. These night vision systems aren't syncing properly. The tubes should align automatically, but we're getting parallax errors that throw off depth perception. Cordelia took the nearest PVS-31 from a corporal who looked relieved to hand it over. She examined it with the kind of attention most people reserve for examining their own reflection, turning it, checking connections, running through a diagnostic sequence that wasn't in any manual the Marines had been given. The problem is the eye relief calibration. She made a minute adjustment to the eyepiece assembly. These systems were designed for operators wearing different helmet configurations. The standard MICH 2000 helmet sits a quarter-inch higher than the lightweight models you're using. That offset creates the parallax. She handed it back to the corporal. Try it now. He put the device to his eyes, tested the alignment against a distant target. His expression shifted from frustration to surprise. It's perfect, ma'am. How did you know that? But Cordelia had already moved to the next Marine, making the same adjustment. And the next, and the next. 12 systems calibrated in the time it would have taken most technicians to diagnose one problem. Sutton watched with growing fascination. This wasn't someone who'd read about the equipment in a manual. This was someone who'd used it, in the field, in conditions where mistakes meant consequences worse than training failures. Across the field, Sterling Vaughn stood in the shade of an equipment shed watching through binoculars. He'd come to observe weapons qualifications, but his attention had been drawn to the cluster of Marines around the unfamiliar woman. Captain Wesley Durant appeared at his shoulder, 36 years old, an intelligence officer. The kind of quiet professional who saw connections other people missed. Commander, Durant's voice was neutral, but there was a question in it. Captain? The woman helping Lieutenant Sutton's team, I don't recognize her from any unit on base. Vaughn lowered the binoculars. He'd been asking himself the same question since their meeting. Who was she? What was she? And why did her presence feel like a storm front rolling in from the Atlantic, all pressure and electricity, and the promise of things changing fast? She's JSOC. The admission felt like surrender. Here to assess readiness. Duran absorbed this information, calculated. JSOC doesn't usually send assessors who know field maintenance procedures for special operations equipment. No, Vaughn raised the binoculars again. They don't. Do you know who she is, sir? It was the question Vaughn had been avoiding all afternoon. The question that had 100 possible answers, and none of them made sense. Not yet. He watched Cordelia finish with the last night vision system and say something to Sutton that made the young lieutenant nod with the intensity of someone receiving wisdom she'd remember forever. But I'm starting to think I should. The afternoon burned away into evening. The base cycled through shift changes and meal rotations. Thousands of personnel moving through familiar rhythms that had been repeated so many times they'd become ritual. Comfort and routine, security and predictability. Cordelia Blackwell didn't eat in the mess hall, didn't socialize in the officers' club, didn't do any of the things that would make her visible to the social networks that existed in every military installation. Instead, she waited. At 2,200 hours, when the base had settled into its nighttime configuration, she made her move. The Information Systems Center was housed in a reinforced building near the command complex. Concrete and steel, electromagnetic shielding. Security measures that would stop casual intrusion, but wouldn't slow down someone with the right credentials and the right knowledge. Cordelia's credentials were very right, and her knowledge was extensive. She entered through a side door that most people didn't know existed. A maintenance access that required a code changed weekly. She had this week's code. She had every week's code for the past 6 months. JSOC had provided them when they'd approved her operation. The interior was dimly lit, red lighting to preserve night vision. The hum of cooling systems working overtime to dissipate the heat generated by rows of servers and communications equipment. The smell of electronics and cold air, and the particular sterility of spaces where information flowed instead of blood. A young technician sat at a console monitoring system status. He looked up when Cordelia entered, surprise and suspicion crossing his face in quick succession. "Ma'am, this area is restricted. I'll need to see your authorization." She showed him the same ID card she'd shown Vaughn. The technician scanned it through his reader. His screen flashed green, access granted, clearance level sufficient. But his expression remained uncertain. "Ma'am, I don't have you on tonight's access roster." "I'm not on the roster." Cordelia moved past him toward the SIPR terminals. "I'm on a different list." The technician opened his mouth to protest, but something in her bearing made the words die unspoken. This wasn't someone you questioned. This was someone you obeyed and hoped you'd made the right choice. He returned to his monitoring station, watched her from the corner of his eye, ready to call security if she did anything that violated protocol, but also aware that if her clearance was legitimate, interfering with her work could end his career. Cordelia sat at a terminal that had access to the base's classified network. She logged in with credentials that made the system recognize her as a ghost, present but not recorded, there but not tracked. The access logs appeared on her screen, thousands of entries. Every time someone accessed classified information, the system recorded who, when, and what. A digital paper trail that most people assumed was buried too deep for anyone to find. But Cordelia had been finding buried trails for 24 years. She filtered the data. Operation Silent Echo, 8 months ago? Who had accessed the mission files in the 72 hours before launch? 11 names appeared. She cross-referenced with Operation Winterfang. 5 months ago, same question. Who had accessed those files before the operation went catastrophically wrong? 9 names appeared. 6 of them matched the first list. Operation Iron Resolve, 2 months ago. The pattern repeated. 7 names, 5 matched both previous operations. Cordelia narrowed the filter. Not just who accessed the files, when they accessed them, at what time, in what sequence. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in chemical solution. Slowly, inevitably. Damning, 0347 hours, every 72 hours, like clockwork. Someone accessing classified operational data in the dead hours between midnight and dawn, when oversight was minimal and suspicion was sleeping. She ran the final filter. Who had accessed all 3 operations at 0347 hours in the 72 hours before each mission launched? 1 name. Master Sergeant Dalton Pierce. Cordelia pulled up his personnel file. The photograph showed a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and aged in desert sun. 52 years old, 28 years of service, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. The kind of record that spoke of sacrifice and courage and the willingness to bleed for the Corps. But the financial records told a different story. She'd accessed those earlier through JSOC channels that bypassed normal banking privacy. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, wire transfers from a shell corporation registered in Panama, $470,000 deposited over 18 months. The dates of the deposits aligned perfectly with the dates of the failed operations. Blood money. That's what it was. American blood converted to foreign currency and hidden where most investigators would never think to look. Cordelia felt the familiar cold settle in her chest, the same feeling she'd had when they told her about her father. When the official story said training accident, but the classified truth said preventable tragedy caused by someone dismissing intelligence from a source they thought didn't matter. She pulled up the calendar, calculated. Pierce's pattern was 72 hours. The last access had been 71 hours ago. He would access again in approximately 1 hour, at 0347 hours, like he had a dozen times before, like he would tonight because he had no reason to believe anyone was watching. Cordelia set her watch alarm. Then she settled in to wait. The technician at the monitoring station had stopped watching her. Whatever she was doing, it was above his clearance and beyond his concern. He focused on his screens and tried not to think about the questions he'd be asked tomorrow when his supervisor reviewed the access logs and wanted to know who the ghost user had been. At 0330 hours, Cordelia's alarm vibrated silently against her wrist. She moved to a different terminal, one with a direct view of the entry door, one where she could see without being seen. The minutes crawled by 0335, 0340, 0345. At 0347 hours, the door opened. Master Sergeant Dalton Pierce entered the Information Systems Center with the confidence of someone who had every right to be there. He nodded to the technician, friendly, familiar, the kind of nod that said this was routine and unremarkable. Evening, Corporal. Need to check some logistics data for the commander's morning brief. Yes, Master Sergeant. The technician barely looked up. This had happened before, would happen again. Routine. Pierce sat at a terminal 3 stations away from where Cordelia remained motionless in the shadows. He logged in with his own credentials. Legitimate access. Authorized use. Nothing to trigger alarms or raise flags. He pulled up files related to Operation Sandstorm, mission parameters, equipment manifests, rules of engagement, and most importantly, the updated intelligence assessment that showed enemy force positions and patrol patterns. Cordelia watched him work. Efficient, practiced. He copied the data to an encrypted external drive, a small device no bigger than a lighter, easy to conceal, easy to transport. The entire process took 4 minutes. Pierce logged out, pocketed the drive, exchanged another casual nod with the technician, and left. Cordelia waited 30 seconds. Then she followed. The base at night was a different animal than during the day. Quieter, darker, patrol patterns that moved in predictable circuits. Security that relied on cameras and motion sensors, and the assumption that anyone moving at 0400 hours had authorization to be doing so. Pierce walked with purpose but without haste. A man was somewhere to be, but no reason to rush. He headed away from the command complex, away from the barracks, toward the family housing units on the eastern edge of the base. Cordelia maintained a 100-meter interval, close enough to keep visual contact, far enough to avoid detection. Years of fieldcraft made the surveillance second nature. She moved through shadows like she belonged there, like darkness was just another form of cover. Pierce reached Housing Unit 247, his assigned residence, a modest 2-bedroom unit that the Marine Corps provided to senior enlisted personnel. He unlocked the door and disappeared inside. Cordelia found a position with good overwatch, a maintenance shed with a clear line of sight to Pierce's front door. She settled in to watch. 15 minutes passed, then Pierce emerged again. Different now, changed into civilian clothes, jeans, dark jacket, ball cap pulled low. The uniform was gone. The Marine was hidden beneath the disguise of an ordinary man running ordinary errands at an extraordinary hour. He walked to the visitor parking lot, got into a civilian truck, a Ford F-150 that could have belonged to anyone. Cordelia had anticipated this. She'd staged a vehicle earlier, a nondescript sedan from the base motor pool. She checked it out using credentials that would evaporate from the system by morning. She followed Pierce off the base, through the main gate where the MPs waved him through with barely a glance, onto the highway that ran south toward Virginia Beach, into the civilian world where Marines became invisible and their secrets could be hidden in plain sight. 20 minutes of driving. Pierce took surface streets, checked his mirrors with the paranoia of someone who knew surveillance was possible but hadn't spotted it yet. He pulled into a strip mall parking lot. Half the businesses were closed. A 24-hour convenience store provided the only light. Pierce parked in the shadows behind a closed dry cleaner. 2 minutes later, a black SUV pulled in beside him. Cordelia watched from across the street. She'd positioned herself in the parking lot of a closed fast food restaurant. Engine off, lights off, just another empty car in a landscape of empty cars. The SUV's driver emerged. Male, 40s, suit and tie at 0445 hours. That told her everything she needed to know about who she was looking at. This wasn't street muscle. This was management. Pierce handed over the encrypted drive. The transaction was quick, professional. No conversation that she could see, no pleasantries, just business. The suit handed Pierce an envelope. Even from a distance, Cordelia could see it was thick. Cash. The kind of payment that left no electronic trail. The meeting lasted less than 3 minutes. Then both men returned to their vehicles and drove away in opposite directions. Cordelia followed the SUV. 20 more minutes of careful surveillance. The SUV headed toward Norfolk, toward the commercial district where defense contractors maintained offices in anonymous buildings with unremarkable signs. The SUV pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a building whose directory listed a dozen different companies, most of them probably legitimate. But one name caught Cordelia's attention: Blackridge Strategic Solutions, Suite 1400. The SUV disappeared into the garage. Cordelia didn't follow. She'd seen enough. She had the pattern. She had the evidence. She had everything except the time to stop what was already in motion. Operation Sandstorm was scheduled to launch in 16 hours. The intelligence Pierce had sold was already being transmitted to hostile forces, already being analyzed, already being used to prepare kill zones and ambush positions. 73 Marines were going to walk into a trap unless she could convince Sterling Vaughn to trust her completely. Not partially, not conditionally, completely. She drove back to base as dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of amber and rose, the new day arriving with all its promises and threats. The base would wake soon. Thousands of Marines would begin their routines. And somewhere among them, a traitor would smile and go about his business, confident that his secret was safe. But Cordelia Blackwell had never been very good at leaving secrets buried. She returned to the Information Systems Center. Different shift, different technician, same credentials that granted access without question. She compiled everything: the access logs, the financial records, the surveillance footage she'd captured on her phone showing Pierce's meeting with the Blackridge representative, the license plate number of the SUV that would trace back to a corporate account. She encrypted it all into a single file, sent it to Sterling Vaughn's classified email with a timestamp of 0615 hours, and a message that contained 3 words: "We need to talk." At 700 hours, Cordelia's phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number that she recognized as Vaughn's personal cell. "My office. Now." She walked across the base in the early morning light. Marines were emerging from barracks. Running formations appeared on distant roads. The smell of breakfast drifted from mess halls. The base waking to another day of training and preparation and the grinding work of maintaining military readiness. Vaughn's office door was closed. She knocked once. "Enter." He sat behind his desk. The file she'd sent him was open on his computer screen. His face was pale, his jaw set in a hard line that spoke of anger barely contained. "Close the door." Cordelia complied. "You followed Pierce off base, without authorization, without backup. If he'd spotted you, he didn't spot me. That's not the point." Vaughn stood, paced, energy that needed somewhere to go. "You could have compromised the entire investigation. You could have gotten yourself killed. You should have coordinated with base security, with NCIS, with someone who has actual authority to conduct surveillance operations." "Commander," Cordelia's voice was quiet, calm. "I have authority, more than you know." "Then tell me," frustration broke through his professional control, "tell me who you really are. Because right now I'm coordinating with a ghost, taking orders from someone who won't even give me her rank. And I'm about to accuse one of the finest Marines I've ever known of treason, based on evidence I can't verify in surveillance that might not be admissible in any court." It was a fair point. Cordelia acknowledged that silently. She'd pushed him far, farther than most commanders would have gone on faith alone. But she couldn't reveal herself yet, not completely. Because Pierce wasn't the only traitor. The evidence suggested a conspiracy that ran deeper than one master sergeant selling data. The money was too much, the operation too sophisticated. Someone else was involved, Someone with higher access, higher rank. Commander, look at the file again. The financial records. Pierce received $470,000. But look at the transaction history for Black Ridge Strategic. Vaughn returned to his screen, scrolled through the data. Total outflows to offshore accounts. 2.8 million over 18 months. His eyes widened as the implication registered. Pierce isn't working alone. No, Cordelia moved closer to the desk. He's being paid as a junior partner. Someone else is receiving the larger cut. Someone with access to intelligence beyond what a master sergeant could obtain. Someone who can authorize operations and modify mission parameters without raising flags. Major Merrick. Vaughn said the name like it hurt. My S2 officer. He has that level of access. Cordelia had suspected the same, but suspicion wasn't proof. And moving against an officer required evidence that would survive scrutiny. We need to confirm it. How Borsham? We set a trap. We feed false information through controlled channels. We watch where it goes, and we see who takes the bait. Vaughn considered this, the tactical part of his mind engaging with the problem, treating it like any other operation. Identify the objective. Assess the resources. Plan the execution. What kind of false information? A modification to Operation Sandstorm, a vulnerability that looks real but isn't. If Merrick is involved, he'll pass it to Pierce. Pierce will pass it to Black Ridge, and we'll have proof. And if Pierce notices the intelligence doesn't match what he accessed last night, he won't, because you're going to update the official mission parameters based on my assessment. You're going to do exactly what I told you in the briefing. Reduce the extraction window from 3 minutes to 90 seconds. Change the approach vector. Modify the timeline. Understanding dawned on Vaughn's face. You're using the real tactical improvements to mask the investigation. Correct. Your Marines get better intelligence. We get to watch who objects to the changes, and we identify everyone in the conspiracy before the operation launches. It was elegant, dangerous, but elegant. Vaughn sat down heavily. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Trusting a stranger, investigating his own people, making decisions that could save lives or destroy careers, or both. If you're wrong about this, I'm not wrong, Commander. How can you be so sure? Cordelia met his eyes. Let him see past the professional mask to the person underneath. The woman who'd spent 24 years hunting ghosts and traitors, and the people who valued profit over patriotism. Because I've seen this before. Because I've hunted people like Pierce and Merrick and whoever else is hiding in your command. Because 24 years ago, someone dismissed intelligence that could have saved my father's life, and I swore I'd never let rank blind me to truth again. The admission hung between them. Personal, vulnerable, the first crack in the armor she'd maintained since arriving. Vaughn absorbed it, understood something about her that transcended rank and protocol. What do you need me to do? Call a briefing, 1300 hours. All personnel involved in Operation Sandstorm. You're going to announce tactical modifications based on updated intelligence assessment. I'll be there, watching, listening, looking for the reaction that tells us who else is involved. And then we have 14 hours to arrest traitors and save your Marines. Vaughn nodded once. Decision made. Course set. 14 hours. Cordelia left his office and walked into a morning that had transformed from routine to critical. Somewhere on this base, at least 2 men were preparing to sell American lives for foreign money. They thought they were safe, thought their secret was secure. They were wrong, and in 14 hours when Operation Sandstorm launched with good intelligence instead of compromised data, they would understand exactly how wrong they'd been. But first, Cordelia Blackwell had to finish identifying all the players in this conspiracy, because her instincts told her that Pierce and Merrick weren't the end of it. They were the middle, and somewhere above them, someone else was pulling strings. Someone with the power to authorize compromise operations. Someone with connections that reached beyond a single base. Someone who thought rank made them untouchable. They were about to learn that the woman with no insignia was the most dangerous person they'd ever underestimated. The briefing room at 1300 hours felt different than it had that morning. The same space, the same chairs, the same holographic display casting blue light across the faces of officers who thought they understood what was about to happen. They didn't. Sterling Vaughn stood at the head of the table. His bearing was parade ground perfect, but anyone who knew him well could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightness around his eyes. He was about to accuse men under his command of treason, about to trust a 4-star general whose identity he'd learned only hours before, About to bet 73 Marine lives on intelligence that contradicted everything his own S2 section had provided. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Every officer involved in Operation Sandstorm sat around that table. Major Nolan Merrick, intelligence officer, 44 years old, 16 years of service, 2 combat deployments. A record that looked immaculate on paper but might be written in blood and lies. Master Sergeant Dalton Pierce stood near the back wall, arms crossed, expression neutral, looking like every other senior NCO who'd attended 1,000 briefings and expected nothing surprising from this one. Lieutenant Kira Sutton sat to Vaughn's left, young, attentive, unaware that the 4-star general who'd helped her with equipment that morning was sitting in the back corner, again watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. Captain Wesley Durant occupied the chair beside Merrick, Naval Intelligence, 36 years old. He'd been briefed by Vaughn 90 minutes ago, told enough to understand his role, not enough to compromise the operation if he inadvertently revealed something. Cordelia Blackwell sat in the same chair she'd occupied that morning. Still no insignia. Still no rank showing. A 4-star general playing the role of ghost watching the living prepare for war. Vaughn activated the tactical display. The hologram shifted. New approach vectors appeared. Modified timelines, changed extraction points. Gentlemen, we have updated intelligence on Operation Sandstorm. His voice carried command authority, but Cordelia could hear the undercurrent. The stress of a man walking a tightrope over an abyss. Analysis of recent enemy patrol patterns indicates our initial assessment was optimistic. The 3-minute extraction window is no longer viable. Major Merrick leaned forward. Sir, my section reviewed the satellite data this morning. Enemy force disposition hasn't changed significantly. Your section's analysis was based on satellite imagery that's 3 weeks old. Vaughn's response was measured, controlled. We've received updated SIGINT intercepts indicating patrol pattern modifications beginning 12 days ago. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Cordelia had provided JSOC intelligence that Vaughn's section wouldn't have had access to, intelligence that validated her assessment from the morning briefing. The new timeline compresses our window to 90 seconds from breach to extraction. Air assets will need to adjust their loiter patterns. Ground teams will need to modify their approach vectors to account for the shifted enemy positions. Vaughn walked through the changes with professional precision, each modification sound, each adjustment tactically valid, the kind of last-minute refinements that happened on every operation when new intelligence arrived. But Cordelia wasn't watching Vaughn. She was watching faces, reading micro-expressions, looking for the tells that separated honest surprise from guilty knowledge. Merrick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something that might have been annoyance or might have been alarm. Pierce remained motionless, but his eyes moved. Quick glances toward Merrick, toward the door, calculating, processing. Sutton asked the question that needed asking. Sir, what's the source of this updated intelligence? If my team is going in with a 90-second window, I need to know the confidence level. Vaughn gestured toward Cordelia without looking at her. Our JSOC observer provided the assessment. It's been verified through multiple channels. All eyes turned to the woman in the back corner. She met their gazes without reaction. Just a slight nod. Acknowledgement without explanation. Merrick's voice carried skepticism wrapped in professional courtesy. Sir, with respect, JSOC assessments typically come through official channels with supporting documentation. I haven't seen any updated intelligence reports in the system because they're compartmented above your clearance level major. Vaughn's response was sharp, definitive. The source is classified. The intelligence is valid. Those are the only facts you need to execute this operation. The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Officers shifted in their seats. This wasn't how briefings usually went. Commanders didn't typically withhold intelligence sources from their S2 officers. Didn't typically accept assessments from unidentified observers over their own intelligence sections. Merrick's expression remained professionally neutral, but Cordelia saw what Vaughn couldn't from his position. The slight tremor in Merrick's hand as he made notes on his tablet. The way his eyes cut toward Pierce again. The barely visible swallow that suggested a dry mouth and elevated stress. Guilty knowledge had a signature, and Merrick was broadcasting it to anyone trained to see. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes. Vaughn detailed the modified operation with the same authority he'd shown that morning. But now the plan was better. The intelligence was accurate. The Marines would have a fighting chance instead of walking into a prepared kill zone. When he dismissed the officers, Cordelia watched the patterns of departure. Merrick moved quickly, not running, but purposeful, like a man with urgent business elsewhere. Pierce took longer, stopped to chat with junior officers, playing the role of the seasoned NCO, offering encouragement to younger Marines. But his eyes tracked Merrick's exit, and when he finally left, he went into the same direction. Cordelia waited 30 seconds, then followed. The base sprawled across hundreds of acres, buildings and hangars and equipment yards, a city within a city. Easy to lose someone in the maze of structures and vehicles. Easy to have a conversation that no one else would overhear. She tracked Merrick to a maintenance hangar on the eastern edge of the flight line, a building scheduled for renovations, empty of personnel during normal duty hours. The perfect place for a conversation that couldn't be overheard. Cordelia approached from downwind, using the hangar's bulk to mask her movement. She found a position near a ventilation grating that carried voices from inside the building with perfect clarity. Changes everything. Merrick's voice, stressed, angry. If they're using updated SIGINT, our buyers won't get the kill zone they paid for. Keep your voice down. Pierce, calmer, but with an edge that suggested his composure was manufactured. We don't know where this intelligence came from. Could be routine updates. Could be nothing. Nothing, Pierce. They compressed our window to 90 seconds. Modified the entire approach vector. That woman in the briefing, the one Vaughn called a 4-star general this morning, she's the one who pushed for these changes. Cordelia's eyes narrowed. So word had spread about her identity reveal in Vaughn's office, faster than she'd anticipated. A general wouldn't operate without rank insignia, Pierce said, but doubt crept into his voice. It's against protocol. I ran her authentication code. Merrick's voice rose. Tango 7 Sierra 921 Foxtrot. That's JSOC commander level. The highest classification I've ever seen. If she really is a 4-star, we have a problem. A pause. Cordelia could imagine Pierce processing this information, calculating risks, adjusting plans. We stick to the timeline. Pierce's decision carried the weight of command despite his rank. We already transmitted last night's data. Blackridge has already passed it to the buyers. We can't pull it back now without raising questions we don't want to answer. Then the operation fails. Again. And this time they'll investigate. They'll find the pattern. Let them investigate. We've been careful. Nothing connects us to Blackridge except money, and that money's buried deeper than anyone can dig. What about Crane? Merrick's voice dropped. If she's really JSOC commander, she'll go straight to him. He authorized half our facility access. Crane knows how to keep his mouth shut. He's got more to lose than we do. Cordelia had heard enough. She activated the recording application on her phone. The conversation had been captured. Admissible in court or not, it was evidence that could destroy 3 careers and save 73 lives. She withdrew from the hangar as quietly as she'd approached. Pierce and Merrick would emerge soon. Would return to their duties looking like Marines who'd just discussed routine operational matters. But their secret was no longer secret. Their conspiracy was exposed. And the clock was ticking toward a reckoning that none of them saw coming. Cordelia walked directly to the base commander's office. She didn't call ahead, didn't request an appointment. Just walked past the secretary with the kind of authority that made the woman assume she had permission to be there. Colonel Thaddeus Crane sat behind a desk that spoke of 30 years of service and the accumulation of power that came with surviving and advancing through a military career. 56 years old, silver hair, the weathered face of a man who'd made hard decisions and lived with their consequences. He looked up when Cordelia entered without knocking. Surprise flickered across his features, then annoyance that shifted quickly to something else when he saw her expression. Can I help you? Cordelia closed the door behind her. Locked it. Colonel, I'm General Cordelia Blackwell, JSOC Commander for Counterintelligence Operations. I'm here to inform you that you're under investigation for conspiracy to commit espionage and unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Crane's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, denial, calculation. Then something cold and hard settled over his features. I don't know what you're talking about, General. Transaction records show wire transfers totaling $1.9 million to an offshore account in your name. Authentication logs show you authorized facility access for Master Sergeant Pierce on 3 occasions when classified intelligence was compromised. Communication intercepts show you contacted Blackridge Strategic Solutions 4 hours ago immediately after Commander Vaughn announced modifications to Operation Sandstorm. The last detail was a calculated gamble, but Crane's expression confirmed it was true. His hand moved toward his desk drawer. Cordelia's weapon cleared leather before his fingers reached the handle. A Sig Sauer P226, standard issue for JSOC personnel, aimed at center mass with the steady grip of someone who'd done this before. Keep your hands where I can see them, Colonel. Crane froze. His face had gone pale, the reality of his situation crashing through whatever illusions he'd been maintaining. You're making a mistake. No, sir. You made the mistake 18 months ago when you decided that selling American lives was an acceptable price for your retirement fund. As if summoned by fate, a knock sounded at the door. Sharp, official. Colonel Crane, this is Special Agent Morrison, NCIS. Please open the door. Crane looked at Cordelia, at the weapon still trained on him, at the door where federal agents waited with handcuffs and evidence, and the end of everything he'd built over 30 years. His shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. Who are you? The question came out hollow. Defeated. Really? Cordelia lowered her weapon, moved to unlock and open the door. Someone who spent 24 years making sure rank doesn't protect traitors. The NCIS agents entered, 4 of them. Professional, efficient. They placed Crane in handcuffs with the practiced ease of people who'd done this too many times before. Colonel Thaddeus Crane, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, and accepting bribes from foreign entities. The Miranda warning faded as Cordelia walked out into a corridor that had transformed from routine to historic. Word would spread within minutes. The base commander arrested. A conspiracy exposed. Sterling Vaughn met her outside the administrative building. His expression was grim but resolute. Crane, in custody. NCIS has him. Vaughn absorbed this. Pierce and Merrick. Still on base, still unaware. We have approximately 20 minutes before word reaches them. Assemble your strike team. We end this now. Yes, ma'am. The arrests happened with military precision. 2 teams, simultaneous execution, coordinated to the second. Cordelia watched from the Tactical Operations Center as multiple screens showed Pierce and Merrick being taken into custody. Both surprised, both realizing too late that their world had ended. By 16:30 hours, all 3 conspirators sat in NCIS detention. Separated, isolated, their careers over. Their futures decided by courts-martial that wouldn't show mercy. Sterling Vaughn found Cordelia in the operations center. His expression carried relief mixed with residual shock. General Operation Sandstorm is still scheduled to launch at 2200 hours. Do we proceed? It was the right question, mission-focused, professional. We proceed. But first, Commander, we need to talk. My office. 20 minutes. Vaughn arrived exactly 20 minutes later. Found Cordelia in the small office she'd been assigned. Bare walls, standard furniture. Nothing personal except a framed photograph on the desk that she turned face down when he entered. Close the door, Commander. Sit. He complied. She remained standing, looking out the window at the base preparing for nightfall. For several moments, neither spoke. General, I need to apologize. No, she turned to face him. You don't. You did exactly what I needed you to do. Questioned, pushed back, made me prove every assertion. That's good leadership. I dismissed you, called you administrative staff, ordered you to sit down and be quiet. Because I showed up without rank insignia and contradicted your intelligence in front of your Marines. Any competent commander would have reacted the same way. She moved to sit across from him. For the first time since arriving, letting the professional mask slip slightly. 24 years ago, I was a first lieutenant, 23 years old, fresh out of officer training and assigned to an intelligence analysis team supporting operations in the Balkans. We were tracking Serbian paramilitary movements. I identified a pattern in their patrol routes, warned my commanding officer that our planned route would put us directly in their path. Vaughn listened intently, understanding that this wasn't just history. This was the reason. He dismissed my assessment, said I was too junior to understand the bigger picture, that the senior intelligence analyst with 15 years of experience had already vetted the route, that I should stick to my assigned tasks and let the adults make the decisions. Her voice remained steady, but Vaughn could see the pain beneath the control. 7 men died in that ambush, Commander, including my father, Colonel Marcus Blackwell. He was the senior officer on that patrol. The man who dismissed my warning was his second in command, a man who valued rank and experience over the intelligence itself. The weight of that revelation settled between them. After the investigation, after the classified report that only 6 people ever read, I made a decision. I would spend my career proving that competence matters more than credentials, that the truth doesn't care about rank or time in service. That the quietest voice in the room might be the most important one. She stood, moved back to the window. So when I walk into a briefing room without rank insignia and a commander dismisses me, I'm not offended, I'm evaluating. Does this officer have the flexibility to recognize when he's wrong? Can he set aside ego when lives are at stake? Will he learn from mistakes or repeat them? Vaughn felt the full weight of what had happened. This hadn't been just an investigation. It had been a test, and somehow he'd passed. You could have revealed yourself immediately, ordered me to listen. I could have, but then I would have learned nothing about who you really are. Rank makes people perform commander. It makes them show you what they think you want to see. Remove the rank, and you see the person underneath. And what did you see? She turned to look at him directly. I saw a commander who cares more about his Marines than his ego. Who chose truth over pride when it mattered? Who can admit when he's wrong and adjust accordingly? That's rare, and it's exactly what JSOC needs. Before Vaughn could respond, his phone vibrated. A message from the TOC Operation Sandstorm teams assembled and ready. It's time, General. Yes, it is. Let's bring your Marines home. At 21:45 hours, 15 minutes before Operation Sandstorm was scheduled to launch, Cordelia stood in the Tactical Operations Center watching satellite feeds paint the target area in shades of gray and green. Sterling Vaughn commanded from forward position, Alpha, his voice calm and professional, over the secure radio net. Havoc actual to all elements. Final status check. One by one, the team leaders reported ready. Weapons hot, night vision calibrated. Marines locked and loaded for an operation that had been compromised and then salvaged in the span of 72 hours. Havoc actual, this is TOC. You are green for execution. Time on target, 90 seconds from breach. Good hunting. Copy TOC Havoc elements. We are execute in 3, 2, 1. Execute, execute, execute. On the satellite feed, Cordelia watched the Marines move. Precise, professional. The corrected intelligence performing exactly as she'd projected. The compound breach happened faster than the enemy could react. 8 hostages located and secured within 45 seconds. Then the unexpected happened. Havoc actual, this is Overwatch. The drone operator's voice carried urgency. Multiple vehicles approaching from northwest. 12 hostile styles. ETA 4 minutes to your position. Cordelia's jaw tightened. That patrol wasn't in any intelligence assessment. A random element that happened to be in the wrong place at the worst possible time. Vaughn's response came back steady. Copy Overwatch. Havoc elements, we have enemy reinforcements inbound. Recommend we establish defensive perimeter and hold until extraction arrives. It was the tactically sound decision. Dig in, use superior firepower to hold off 12 hostiles, wait for the helicopters. It was also the decision that would get Marines killed, because defensive positions meant staying static, and staying static meant other enemy patrols in the area would converge. 12 hostiles would become 20, then 40. Cordelia had seen it before. Good commanders making sound decisions that led to catastrophic outcomes. She reached for the radio, keyed the command channel that only Vaughn could hear. Commander Vaughn, this is General Blackwell. Execute fallback protocol Sierra immediately. Authentication Tango 7 Sierra 921 Foxtrot. Silence on the other end. 3 seconds that felt like 3 years. Vaughn didn't know what Protocol Sierra was. It had been established 36 hours ago in a classified planning session with JSOC assets he didn't know existed, a contingency protocol designed specifically for this scenario. This was the test, the final test. Would he trust orders from a source he couldn't verify in the moment? Would he execute a protocol he didn't understand? Would he demonstrate the lessons she'd been teaching since the moment she walked onto his base? Copy that, General. Vaughn's voice came back firm, decisive, no hesitation. All Havoc elements execute Protocol Sierra, break contact, and move to extraction point Charlie. Double time. On the satellite feed, Cordelia watched the Marines move, not toward the primary extraction point where the MH-60 helicopters were orbiting, toward a secondary location 2 kilometers east, a location where 2 MV-22 Ospreys that weren't on any official manifest had been holding position and defilade behind a ridgeline, assets she'd positioned personally. Contingency Vaughn had never been briefed on. Insurance against exactly this scenario. Havoc actual, this is Phantom Flight. A new voice on the radio. We have visual on your element. Prepare for immediate extraction. The Ospreys dropped into the valley like avenging angels. Rotors screaming, defensive systems ready. The Marines loaded in textbook fashion while enemy reinforcements were still 3 minutes out. Phantom Flight package secure. Wheels up. The Ospreys climbed out of the valley at maximum thrust, gone before the enemy arrived. Clean extraction, zero contact, 80 hostages recovered, 73 Marines safe. Mission success in its purest form. Cordelia let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. In the TOC, Captain Durant approached. General Commander Vaughn is requesting secure comms. She accepted the handset. Vaughn, General, his voice carried exhaustion and relief in equal measure. May I ask what Protocol Sierra was? A test, Commander, to see if you'd trust orders you didn't understand from a source you couldn't verify. To see if you'd learned that sometimes the right answer comes from the quiet voice in the back of the room. A pause, then, and if I'd chosen wrong, if I'd stayed to fight, then the Ospreys would have extracted you from your primary location anyway. But it would have taken longer, been more dangerous. Cost you the 90 seconds that separate clean success from acceptable losses. And I would have known you hadn't fully learned the lesson. Which lesson, ma'am? That leadership isn't about having all the answers, Commander. It's about recognizing when someone else does. Rank is just clothing. What matters is what you do when the uniform comes off and all that's left is trust. She could hear the smile in his voice. Understood, General. Havoc actual out. When the teams returned at 0340 hours exhausted but victorious, Sterling Vaughn found Cordelia in the operations center. General, my Marines want to thank you. They know something happened, that someone changed the intelligence that saved their lives. They don't need to thank me, Commander. They need to thank you for being willing to listen when it mattered. Still, they deserve to know who you are. Cordelia considered, then nodded. Assemble them. TOC briefing room, 10 minutes. When 73 Marines filed into the briefing room, they found the woman from the morning briefing standing at the front, still in fatigues, but now wearing the insignia she'd kept hidden for 3 days. 4 stars on her collar, JSOC patch on her shoulder. Lieutenant Sutton saw it first. Her eyes went wide. Around the room, recognition spread like wildfire. Marines, Cordelia began, her voice carrying to every corner. My name is General Cordelia Blackwell. For the past 72 hours, I've been conducting an investigation that resulted in the arrest of 3 individuals who were selling your operational intelligence to hostile forces. Because of that investigation, the intelligence you used tonight was accurate instead of compromised. That's why you all came home. The room was absolutely silent. But I need you to understand something. I didn't save you. Commander Vaughn saved you by being willing to question his own assumptions, by being willing to trust competence over credentials, by choosing mission success over ego. She let that sink in. You've earned the right to know that you serve under a commander who values your lives more than his pride. That's rare, and it's worth more than any medal I could award. She turned to Vaughn, rendered a salute that carried the weight of genuine respect. Well done, Commander. Bring them home, every time. Yes, ma'am. Vaughn's return salute was parade ground perfect. 3 months later, Sterling Vaughn stood in dress blues at JSOC headquarters in North Carolina, receiving his promotion to captain and new assignment as deputy commander of JSOC training operations. Lieutenant Sutton received orders to Naval Intelligence School with a personal letter of recommendation from a 4-star general. Captain Durant received the Intelligence Community Medal of Commendation for his role in the investigation. And in classified channels that most people would never see, a new protocol was officially adopted across the special operations community. The Blackwell Assessment, a methodology for evaluating military personnel without rank indicators, for finding the ones who could see truth regardless of who spoke it, for identifying future leaders based on competence instead of credentials. Implemented at 14 military installations, mandatory for JSOC personnel, Marine Raider selection, SEAL team evaluation. 6 months later, Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, a new commander briefing an operation, a woman in standard fatigues sitting quietly in the back corner. No rank insignia, no name tape, just watching. You're awfully quiet back there. What are you, logistics support? Lieutenant Kira Sutton, now assigned to Pearl Harbor. Intelligence smiled slightly. She knew what was coming. I'm asking you a direct question. What's your role here? The woman looked up, gray eyes meeting the commander's with perfect calm. I'm here to assess operational readiness. Under whose authority? JSOC. The familiar dance began again. Another commander, another test, another lesson about to be learned. And 5,000 miles away, Captain Sterling Vaughn received the notification. General Blackwell had initiated another assessment. He smiled. Somewhere another officer was about to discover that the quietest person in the room often holds the most power. That rank is earned through action, not announced through insignia. That true leadership is forged in silence before it's proclaimed with stars. The Blackwell Protocol continued. The lesson spread. And Marines kept coming home because someone cared enough to make sure competence mattered more than credentials. It was a legacy worth more than any medal. A legacy written in lives saved and leaders transformed. A legacy that would outlive the woman who built it, one quiet assessment at a time.